The dust had barely settled on the grave when Katherine Morgan realized she had nowhere left to go. She stood beside the rough wooden fence that separated her late husband's property from the wild grasslands beyond. Her shoulders shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. The banker had come that morning with papers and cold eyes, telling her she had 1 week to vacate before the property would be seized for debts she had not known existed. Thomas had always handled the money, always assured her they were building something lasting here in Porterville, California. Now he was dead from a rattlesnake bite that had turned his leg black and taken him in 3 agonizing days. And she was alone with nothing but the clothes on her back and a trunk of belongings that would not fetch enough at auction to buy passage back east. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the small ranch outside of town, making the air shimmer above the parched earth. Katherine pressed her forehead against the weathered fence post, not caring that splinters caught in her dark hair. She was 22 years old and utterly lost. Her parents had died of fever before she married Thomas. Her sister had moved to Oregon Territory with her husband, and Katherine had not heard from her in over 2 years. There was no one, nothing. She did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly upon her. Katherine jerked upright, hastily wiping at her tear-stained face with the back of her hand. A man sat astride a dusty brown gelding, his hat pulled low against the sun. He made no move to dismount, just sat there studying her with eyes that were neither cold nor pitying, simply observant. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice rough as gravel but not unkind. "Saw you from the road. Thought maybe you needed help." Katherine tried to compose herself, smoothing down her faded black mourning dress. Up close, she could see the man was somewhere in his 30s, his face deeply tanned and lined from years in the sun. His jaw was strong beneath several days' worth of dark stubble, and his eyes were a startling blue-gray that seemed to see right through her attempts at dignity. There was something in those eyes, something that made her throat tighten again with the threat of fresh tears. Kindness. Real, genuine kindness in a weathered face that had clearly seen its share of hardship. "I am managing, thank you," she said, but her voice broke on the last word, betraying her. The man dismounted with an easy grace despite his size. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim and a blue work shirt that had seen better days. A gun belt hung at his hip, but his hand stayed well away from the weapon as he approached slowly, like someone trying not to startle a wounded animal. "Begging your pardon, madam, but you do not look like you are managing at all." He stopped a respectful distance away, removing his hat to reveal dark hair in need of a cut. "Name is Marcus O'Brien. I have the spread about 3 miles west of here. Heard about your loss. Thomas Morgan was a decent man. I am sorry for your troubles." The simple sincerity in his words undid her completely. Katherine felt her knees buckle, and suddenly Marcus was there, catching her elbow and guiding her to sit on a nearby water trough. He did not try to embrace her or offer empty platitudes. He just stood there, hat in his hands, waiting for the storm to pass. "I am sorry," Katherine managed when she could speak again. "I do not know what has come over me." "Grief has a way of sneaking up on a person," Marcus said quietly. "My wife passed 3 years back, childbirth. The baby, too. Some days it still hits me like a runaway horse." She looked up at him through swollen eyes, seeing the truth of his words etched in the lines around his mouth. "How did you bear it? 1 day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time." He glanced toward the small house behind them. "What will you do now?" Katherine told him everything then, the words spilling out in a rush. The debt, the banker, the week's notice, her lack of family or funds. She had never been one to burden strangers with her problems, but something about Marcus O'Brien's steady presence made her feel safe enough to speak the truth. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I need help," he said finally. "The ranch is more than I can handle alone. I have been making do, but the place is falling apart around my ears. I need someone who can cook, keep house, maybe help with the chickens and the garden. It would not be charity. You would earn your keep and wages besides. Nothing fancy, but enough to start saving toward a future." Katherine stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." Thomas was a good judge of character. He would not have married a lazy woman or a mean one. Marcus met her eyes steadily. "I am offering honest work for honest pay. You would have your own room, proper privacy. I am not looking for anything improper, Mrs. Morgan. Just help running a ranch that is getting away from me." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Something flickered across his weathered face, an old pain surfacing briefly before he pushed it back down. "Because 3 years ago, when Sarah died, I was not much better off than you are now. Neighbor woman named Mrs. Chen came by every day for 2 months, bringing food, helping me keep body and soul together until I could function again. Never asked for a thing in return. She told me to pass the kindness forward when I had the chance." He settled his hat back on his head. "I reckon this is my chance." Katherine felt hope flutter in her chest like a caged bird testing its wings. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think on it. Take tonight. I will come by tomorrow morning with a wagon if you decide yes. Bring whatever you want to keep. The rest can be sold to settle what you owe the bank." Marcus moved toward his horse, then paused. "For what it is worth, Mrs. Morgan, I think you are stronger than you know. You are still standing, still fighting. That counts for something out here." He rode away before she could respond, leaving Katherine sitting on the water trough with tears drying on her face and something that might have been hope warming the cold hollow in her chest. That night, Katherine lay awake in the bed she had shared with Thomas, staring at the ceiling and thinking. Her marriage had been practical rather than passionate. Thomas had needed a wife, she had needed security, and they had gotten along well enough. He had not been cruel, but neither had he been particularly warm. They had shared a house and a life, but never truly shared themselves. She had thought that was simply how marriage worked. Now he was gone, and she was being offered a lifeline by a man who had no reason to help her except simple human decency. The prudent thing would be to accept, to swallow her pride and take the work. The alternative was destitution, possibly starvation. She had no illusions about what happened to women alone with no money in frontier towns. The choices were grim and few, but something else gnawed at her thoughts as she lay there in the darkness. The way Marcus O'Brien had looked at her, not with pity or calculation, but with genuine concern. The kindness in his weathered face, the steadiness in his voice, the way he had caught her when she stumbled, his touch careful and respectful. She had felt something in that moment, a spark of awareness she had never experienced with Thomas. Katherine rolled over and buried her face in the pillow. She could not afford such thoughts. Marcus was offering employment, nothing more. She was a newly widowed woman who should be focused on survival, not on the way a stranger's eyes had made her feel seen for the first time in years. By the time the sun rose, she had made her decision. She spent the morning packing her trunk with the things that mattered, her few good dresses, her mother's Bible, the quilt her sister had made for her wedding. Everything else, the furniture and dishes and linens, she would leave for the bank to sell. Let them have it all. She wanted nothing that would remind her of this place and its broken promises. Marcus arrived exactly when he said he would, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 strong horses. He helped her load the trunk without comment, then handed her up to the seat beside him. As they pulled away from the property, Katherine did not look back. The ride to Marcus's ranch took nearly an hour, following a rutted road that wound through brown hills dotted with scrub oak and manzanita. They did not talk much, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Marcus pointed out landmarks, the creek where the water ran year-round, the stand of trees where deer liked to gather at dusk, the distant smoke from the town of Porterville nestled in the valley below. "It is not much," he said as they crested a rise and his property came into view. "But it is mine, bought and paid for." Katherine saw a simple ranch house built of wood and stone, weathered but solid. A barn stood nearby, its red paint fading but its structure sound. Corrals held a few horses and some cattle, and she could see chickens scratching in the dirt near a small coop. Beyond the buildings, brown hills rolled toward distant mountains, vast and empty and beautiful in their starkness. "It is wonderful," she said, and meant it. Marcus glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You have not seen the inside yet. Place needs a woman's touch." "I have been living like a bachelor for too long." He had not exaggerated. The house was clean enough but stark and bare, with none of the small touches that made a place feel like a home. The main room held a table and chairs, a wood stove, a worn sofa facing a stone fireplace. The kitchen area was functional but joyless, everything put away behind closed cupboard doors. 2 bedrooms opened off the main room, and Marcus showed her to the smaller one. "This was meant to be a nursery," he said quietly, standing in the doorway. "Sarah had it all planned out. After she died, I packed everything away and just left it empty. Seemed wrong to use it for anything else, but that was foolish. A room should be lived in." He cleared his throat. "There is a bed frame in the barn. I will set it up for you this afternoon, get you a mattress from town tomorrow." "I can sleep on the sofa tonight," Katherine said. "You do not need to go to any trouble." "It is no trouble." Marcus turned away, and she saw the tightness in his shoulders that spoke of old grief being stirred up. "I will leave you to settle in. Dinner is usually around 6. Nothing fancy, just whatever I throw together." After he left, Katherine stood in the empty room and felt the weight of what she had done settle over her. She was living in a stranger's house, in a room meant for a child that never lived, working for a man she barely knew. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt oddly calm, as if something in the universe had clicked into place. She spent the rest of the day exploring the house and making mental notes. The place needed more than a woman's touch. It needed someone who cared enough to see beyond the dust and cobwebs, someone willing to coax life back into rooms that had been merely existing for too long. She found linens in a chest, faded but clean, and a set of curtains still in their wrapping. Sarah's touch, she realized. Things bought with hope for a future that never came. Katherine was beating dust from a rug on the front porch when Marcus emerged from the barn, leading one of the horses. He had stripped down to his work shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms corded with muscle. Sweat dampened his hair and made his shirt cling to his shoulders. He looked up and caught her watching, and Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks as she quickly looked away. "Getting the place shaped up already," he called, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Old habits," she called back, grateful that he could not see her burning face. "My mother always said an idle body makes for a troubled mind." Marcus led the horse to the water trough and let it drink. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Katherine shook the rug one last time and draped it over the porch rail. "She died when I was 19. Yellow fever swept through Sacramento that summer, took both my parents in the same week. That is when you married Thomas, a year later. I was working as a seamstress, barely making enough to pay for a room. Thomas came to town looking for supplies and a wife in that order." She smiled without humor. I fit the bill on the second count. Marcus was quiet for a moment, stroking the horse's neck absently. Did you love him? The question was too personal, too intimate for their brief acquaintance, but somehow Katherine did not mind it coming from him. I respected him. We got along. Out here, I suppose that is enough. Maybe. Marcus looked at her across the dusty yard, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Or maybe we just tell ourselves that because we are afraid to want more. Before she could respond, he turned and led the horse back toward the barn, leaving Katherine standing on the porch with her heart beating too fast and questions she could not answer swirling through her mind. That evening, Marcus made good on his word about dinner, throwing together a meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread that was plain but satisfying. They ate at the rough wooden table, and Katherine found herself relaxing into conversation more easily than she had expected. Marcus told her about his ranch, how he had worked as a cowhand for years before saving enough to buy this land. He had met Sarah in San Francisco when he went to sell cattle. She had been a teacher, refined and educated, and he still did not quite understand what she had seen in a rough cattleman like him. She saw what I see, Katherine said quietly. A good man doing honest work. Marcus looked at her, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes before he glanced away. You are kind to say so. I am saying what is true. The silence that followed was charged with something Katherine did not quite understand, something that made her skin feel too warm and her pulse quicken. She stood abruptly, gathering their plates. Let me clean up. You have done enough today. I will not argue with that. Marcus stretched, his joints popping audibly. I need to check on the stock one more time before dark. Make yourself at home, Mrs. Morgan. What is mine is yours as long as you are under my roof. After he left, Katherine washed the dishes in the basin and thought about his words. What is mine is yours. It was just a figure of speech, a polite thing to say to a guest. But it felt like more than that, like a promise of something she could not yet name. She was drying the last plate when Marcus came back inside, his face grave. We have a problem. One of the cows is down near the creek. Looks like she is trying to birth and having trouble. I need to go help her. Can I do anything? Know anything about birthing calves? No, but I can learn. Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. Grab that lantern. This might take a while. They walked down to the creek in the gathering dusk, Katherine following Marcus's sure-footed path through the rough terrain. The cow was indeed in distress, lowing pitifully and heaving with contractions that were not producing results. Marcus knelt beside her, running his hands over her swollen belly, his face set in concentration. Calf is breech, he said. I am going to have to turn it. Hold the lantern steady. What followed was an education in the raw realities of ranch life. Marcus worked with patient determination, his hands gentle despite the urgency of the situation. He talked to the cow in a low, soothing voice, explaining what he was doing as if she could understand. Katherine held the lantern and watched his weathered face, seeing the focus and care he brought to this task. He was not just trying to save livestock. He genuinely cared about this animal's suffering. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably less than one, the calf slid free in a rush of fluid and blood. Marcus cleared its nose and mouth, rubbing its sides vigorously until it coughed and began to breathe. The mother cow, exhausted but alive, turned her head to nose at her baby. Marcus sat back on his heels, his hands and arms covered in blood and birth fluids, a weary smile on his face. Welcome to ranching, Mrs. Morgan. Not quite as romantic as the dime novels make it sound. Katherine found herself smiling back, feeling oddly exhilarated despite the mess and the late hour. I think it is rather wonderful, actually. You saved them both. Could not have done it without your help. You have steady hands. He stood, groaning a little, and stretched his back. "Let us get cleaned up. I am too tired to think straight." They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, and Katherine realized she felt more alive than she had in months, maybe years. There was something about working alongside Marcus, sharing a purpose, that felt right in a way her marriage never had. Over the following weeks, Katherine settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She woke before dawn to make breakfast, spending her mornings cleaning and organizing the house while Marcus worked outside. Afternoons, she spent tending the garden, feeding the chickens, and learning the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done before, but she found satisfaction in it that she had never found in town life. Marcus proved to be an easy man to live with. He was quiet but not sullen, helpful without being overbearing. He treated her with unfailing respect, never entering her room without permission, never making inappropriate comments or gestures. Yet there was something growing between them, an awareness that made ordinary moments feel charged with possibility. When their hands brushed reaching for the same dish. When she looked up from the garden to find him watching her from the barn door. When they sat together on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing while the sun set over the hills. One evening in late October, nearly 2 months after she had arrived, Katherine was mending one of Marcus's shirts when he spoke from his chair by the fire. "You should know that people in town are talking." She looked up, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "Talking about what?" "About you living here, about what we might be doing." His voice was carefully neutral. "I do not care what they say about me, but I do not want your reputation damaged. If you want to move into town, find work there, I will understand. I will give you good references, help you get set up." Katherine set down the mending, her heart suddenly pounding. The thought of leaving this place, leaving Marcus, sent a spike of panic through her that she could not quite hide. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out fierce and immediate, and Marcus looked surprised by his own vehemence. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign he was struggling with something. "No, I do not want you to leave, but I want you to have choices. You deserve that." "I choose to stay," Katherine said quietly, "if you will have me." Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them. Marcus opened his mouth as if to say more, then closed it and nodded. "Then stay. And to hell with what the town thinks." The first cold snap came in November, bringing rain that turned the brown hills briefly green. Katherine woke one morning to find ice crystals on the inside of her window and Marcus already up, stoking the fire in the main room. She emerged from her bedroom wrapped in a shawl to find him making coffee, moving quietly to avoid waking her. "You are up early," she said, and he turned, a smile softening his weathered face. "Could not sleep. Kept thinking about the cattle in the north pasture. Want to move them closer to the barn before the real cold sets in." He poured her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing as he handed it to her. Neither of them pulled away quickly. "Katherine, I have been meaning to ask you something." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, her pulse quickening at his serious tone. "What is it? You have been here almost 3 months now. You have worked harder than any hired hand I ever had, and you have made this place feel like a home again." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I was wondering if you might consider staying on permanent, not just as help but as a partner in the ranch. I would put it in writing, make it legal. Half of everything would be yours." Katherine stared at him, trying to understand what he was offering. "Marcus, I do not have any money to invest. I cannot buy a partnership. I am not asking you to buy anything. I am asking you to build something with me." He set down his own coffee cup and took a step closer. "The truth is, Katherine, I have grown attached to you. More than attached, I look forward to seeing you every morning. I find excuses to come inside during the day just to hear your voice. When I am out working, half my thoughts are about what you might be doing, whether you are happy, whether you need anything." He took a deep breath. "I know it is too soon. You are still grieving Thomas, and I have no right to speak of such things when you have barely had time to mourn. But I want you to know where I stand. I want you to stay, not just as an employee, but as someone I am courting properly, with the hope that someday you might consider becoming my wife." Katherine set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. Her mind was reeling, but her heart knew the truth she had been denying for weeks. "I am not grieving Thomas," she said quietly. "Does that make me a terrible person? He has been dead for months and I barely think of him. I feel guilty about that, but I cannot make myself feel something that is not there." "You do not owe the dead more grief than they earned in life," Marcus said gently. "Thomas was a decent man, but you said yourself it was not a love match. There is no shame in that. When I think about the future now, I see this ranch, I see you." Katherine met his eyes, feeling vulnerable but also strangely free. "I did not expect this. When you found me by that fence, I thought my life was over, but you showed me kindness when you had no reason to. You gave me not just work but a purpose. And somewhere along the way I started to care for you, more than I should, more than is probably proper." Marcus closed the distance between them in 2 strides, taking her hands in his calloused ones. "There is nothing improper about 2 people finding comfort in each other. Nothing wrong with building something good out of loss and loneliness. People will talk even more than they already are. Let them talk. I have spent 3 years alone, Katherine. 3 years going through the motions of living without really being alive. You changed that. From the moment I saw you weeping by that fence, something in me woke up. I wanted to protect you, help you. Then I got to know you and I wanted more. I wanted everything." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but these were not tears of sorrow. "I am afraid. What if I am not enough? What if I cannot be what you need? You are already more than I hoped for." Marcus raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "We do not have to rush anything. Court me properly, let me court you. We will do this right, take our time. But I needed you to know how I feel. I needed you to understand that you are not just an employee to me. You never were." Katherine leaned into his touch, feeling safe in a way she had not felt since her parents died. "I would like that. Being courted by you, building something together." Marcus smiled then, a real smile that lit up his weathered face and made him look years younger. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and respectful, but it sent warmth flooding through Katherine's entire body. "I am going to court you so properly that the whole town will have nothing to complain about," he said against her hair. "Flowers and Sunday dinners and chaperone picnics, the whole romantic production." Katherine laughed, the sound surprising her. "I look forward to it." True to his word, Marcus courted her with old-fashioned determination. Every Sunday they rode into Porterville together for church, sitting in the same pew and ignoring the whispers and stares. Afterwards, Marcus would take her to lunch at the hotel restaurant, treating her like a fine lady despite her worn dresses and work-roughened hands. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, left little notes for her to find during the day, spent their evenings reading aloud to her from books he bought in town. The physical space between them remained carefully maintained. Marcus never entered her room, never tried to steal more than a chaste kiss on the hand or cheek. But the emotional intimacy between them deepened with each passing day. They talked about everything from their childhoods, their fears and dreams and disappointments. Katherine told him about the loneliness of her marriage, how she had felt more like Thomas's housekeeper than his wife. Marcus spoke of Sarah, his guilt over feeling relieved in some ways after she died, because she had never truly adapted to ranch life and her unhappiness had been a constant weight on his conscience. "I loved her," he told Katherine one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "But I do not think I was in love with her, if that makes sense. I was in love with the idea of her, this refined, educated woman who chose a rough cowboy. But the reality was harder. She hated the isolation, missed the city. Every day here felt like a sacrifice to her. I think if she had lived, she might have eventually left me." "You cannot know that," Katherine said softly. "Maybe not. But I know this. What I feel for you is different. You fit here. You fit with me. When I am with you, I am not trying to be someone I am not. I am just Marcus, and that is enough. It is more than enough." Katherine reached for his hand, and they sat there in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, until the night grew too cold to stay outside any longer. Winter settled over the ranch in earnest, bringing storms that turned the roads to mud and kept them isolated for days at a time. Katherine did not mind. She had everything she needed right here. She spent her days cooking and preserving food, mending and making clothes, keeping the house warm and comfortable. Marcus worked outside when the weather permitted, tending the stock and repairing fences and buildings. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing in each other's presence. It was during one of these quiet evenings in late December that Marcus asked her to marry him properly. They were sitting close together on the sofa, Katherine's head resting against his shoulder while he absently stroked her hair. Snow fell outside the window, blanketing the world in white silence. "Katherine Morgan," he said quietly, and she lifted her head to look at him. His weathered face was serious, but his eyes were warm. "I know we agreed to take our time, but I find I do not want to wait any longer. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to spend the rest of my days trying to make you happy, to be worthy of the gift you are giving me by choosing this life, choosing me." Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Marcus kissed her then, really kissed her for the first time, and Katherine felt the world shift on its axis. His lips were warm and firm, his hands gentle as they framed her face. The kiss was everything she had never known she was missing, passion tempered with tenderness, desire balanced with respect. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Soon," Marcus said, his voice rough with restrained want. "I want to marry you soon. I am tired of sleeping alone, tired of keeping my distance. I want you in my bed and in my life officially." "How soon?" Katherine asked, her own voice breathless. "After Christmas. New Year's Day, maybe. Start the new year as husband and wife." He kissed her again, softer this time. "If that is too soon, we can wait. But that is what I want. It is what I want too." They married on January 1st, 1876, in the small church in Porterville with half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a new dress Marcus had commissioned from the dressmaker in town, pale blue silk that made her feel like a princess. Marcus wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. The preacher performed the ceremony, and when Marcus kissed her as his wife, Katherine felt like her life was truly beginning for the first time. The ranch was their honeymoon destination. They had nowhere else they wanted to be. Marcus carried her over the threshold like she weighed nothing, and Katherine laughed with pure joy. He set her down gently in their bedroom, the room that had been his alone for so long and was now theirs together. "Are you nervous?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "A little," she admitted. "Thomas and we never really, it was not like this. I do not know how to explain it." "You do not have to explain." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "We will figure it out together. We have all the time in the world. Tonight is just the first of thousands of nights. There is no rush." But there was a different kind of urgency between them now that the waiting was over, now that they were finally, legally, permanently joined. Marcus undressed her slowly, reverently, treating her body like something precious. Katherine had never felt beautiful before, but under his gaze and his touch, she felt like the most desirable woman in the world. When they finally came together, it was nothing like her experiences with Thomas had been. This was mutual want, shared pleasure, a joining of not just bodies but hearts and souls. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the darkness, Katherine felt tears slip down her temples. Marcus kissed them away, concern in his voice. "Did I hurt you?" "No. It is just, I did not know it could be like that. I did not know I could feel like that." She turned to face him, seeing his weathered face softened with satisfaction and something deeper. "I love you, Marcus O'Brien. I did not know when it happened, but somewhere along the way I fell completely in love with you. I love you too, Katherine O'Brien." He said her new name with satisfaction, pulling her closer. "From the moment I saw you weeping by that fence, I think part of me knew you were going to change my life. For the better, I hope. For the infinitely better." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The ranch demanded endless work, and money was often tight. There were late-season storms that killed some cattle, a bout of illness that swept through the chickens, a barn roof that needed replacing after a strong wind damaged it. But through it all, Katherine and Marcus faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. Katherine discovered she had a head for numbers and began keeping the ranch books, finding ways to save money and maximize their profits. Marcus taught her to ride properly and to shoot, skills he insisted she needed for safety's sake. She proved to be a natural with the horses and spent hours working with a young mare Marcus had bought, gentling her and training her. Their physical relationship deepened and grew, the initial shyness giving way to comfort and experimentation. They learned each other's bodies, what brought pleasure and what brought laughter. Marcus was an attentive lover, always focused on her satisfaction as much as his own. Katherine bloomed under his attention, becoming more confident in her own skin, more willing to express her desires. In the spring, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited until she was certain before telling Marcus. She found him in the barn one evening, brushing down his horse after a long day's work. He looked up when she entered, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "To what do I owe this visit? I thought you were making bread. The bread can wait." Katherine moved closer, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. "I have something to tell you." Marcus set down the brush, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Marcus just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then suddenly he was moving, sweeping her up into his arms and spinning her around, a whoop of joy echoing through the barn. The horse snorted and danced nervously, but Marcus did not care. He set Katherine down and kissed her thoroughly, his hands shaking as they framed her face. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Katherine, are you sure?" "I am sure. The baby should come in late October or early November." Marcus pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She felt his shoulders shaking and realized he was crying. "I thought I would never have this. After Sarah, I thought that chance was gone. But now, with you, everything I dreamed of is coming true." "We are going to need to add on to the house," Katherine said, her own voice thick with tears. "That little room is not going to be a nursery after all. We will need space for children. Plural. I am not planning on stopping at one." Marcus laughed, the sound wet but joyful. "Whatever you want. I will build you a dozen rooms if that is what it takes." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Katherine continued working around the ranch even as her belly swelled. Marcus fussed over her constantly, trying to get her to rest more, but she refused to be coddled. She felt healthy and strong, more vital than ever. They spent the summer working on the house addition, Marcus doing the heavy construction while Katherine planned and decorated. The new wing would include 2 bedrooms and a proper bathing room with a large tub Marcus ordered from a catalog. It was an extravagance, but he insisted that his wife deserved some luxury. Mrs. Chen, the neighbor woman who had helped Marcus after Sarah's death, came to visit in September and immediately took Katherine under her wing. She was a practical Chinese woman in her 50s who had immigrated with her husband during the gold rush and stayed after he died, running a small farm with the help of her adult sons. She taught Katherine what to expect during birth, what supplies to have ready, what signs meant it was time to call for the doctor. She also shared herbal remedies and traditional knowledge that made the last weeks of pregnancy more bearable. "Your husband is good man, Mrs. Chen told Katherine one afternoon over tea. "I see how he looks at you, like you are the sun and he is plant reaching toward light. This baby will be born into much love." "I am afraid," Katherine admitted. "Marcus lost Sarah during childbirth. What if something goes wrong? I cannot bear the thought of leaving him, of our child growing up without me." Mrs. Chen reached across the table and took Katherine's hand. "Fear is natural, but you are young and strong. Sarah was delicate, city woman not built for hard life. You are different. You will be fine." Katherine wanted to believe her, but as the due date approached, the fear grew. Marcus tried to hide his own worry, but she could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the way he stayed close to the house instead of working in the far pastures. They did not talk about it directly, but the ghost of Sarah hung between them, a reminder that childbirth was never guaranteed safe. The pain started on a cold November morning, 3 days after Katherine's 24th birthday. Marcus immediately sent for Mrs. Chen and the doctor from town, then paced the house like a caged animal while Katherine breathed through the contractions. Mrs. Chen arrived first and took charge, banishing Marcus from the bedroom and setting up everything they would need. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Katherine had never known such pain, waves of agony that left her gasping and crying out. Mrs. Chen stayed by her side, wiping her face with cool cloths, encouraging her, telling her she was doing well. The doctor arrived around midnight and examined her, pronouncing that everything was progressing normally if slowly. In the main room, Marcus sat with his head in his hands, listening to his wife's cries and dying 1,000 deaths. This was his worst nightmare come to life, history repeating itself. He prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore, begging for Katherine's life, promising anything if she would just survive. Finally, as dawn was breaking, Katherine gave birth to a son. The baby's first cries were the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard, but he did not move from his chair, terrified of what he would find if he entered that bedroom. Then Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, smiling. "You can come meet your son now, mother and baby both healthy." Marcus nearly collapsed with relief. He stumbled into the bedroom to find Katherine propped up in bed, exhausted and pale but alive, so gloriously alive. She held a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, and when she looked up at him, her face was radiant. "Marcus, meet your son." He approached slowly, as if in a dream, and looked down at the baby in her arms. The infant was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, love so fierce and overwhelming that he had to brace himself against the bed. "He is perfect," Marcus managed, his voice breaking. "You are perfect. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this, for surviving, for being so strong." "His name is Matthew," Katherine said softly. "Matthew Thomas O'Brien, for your father and my late husband. Do you approve?" "I approve of everything about you." Marcus leaned down and kissed her forehead, then gently touched his son's cheek with one calloused finger. "I love you so much, Katherine, both of you. I am the luckiest man alive." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Matthew was a healthy baby with good lungs and an appetite to match. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, getting up for night feedings even though he had to work the next day, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and staring at him in amazement. Katherine watched her husband with their child and fell even more deeply in love with him, if that was possible. By the time Matthew was 6 months old, Katherine was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was twins, 2 boys born in rapid succession one hot July afternoon. They named them Michael and Miles, and suddenly the O'Brien household was chaos. Between 3 babies under 2 years old and running the ranch, Katherine and Marcus barely had time to breathe, let alone talk. But they managed, working as a team, supporting each other through the exhaustion and frustration. Mrs. Chen came to stay for a month after the twins were born, helping with the babies and the housework. Her presence made the difference between survival and thriving, giving Katherine time to recover and Marcus time to keep the ranch running. When she finally went home, she left behind a freezer full of prepared meals and instructions for a Chinese herbal soup that would help Katherine regain her strength. The years that followed were full and busy. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from a small operation to one of the more successful spreads in the county. Marcus hired on extra hands during busy seasons, and Katherine managed the household and helped with the books. The boys grew strong and healthy, keeping their parents constantly busy with their adventures and mischief. When Matthew was 5 and the twins 3, Katherine gave birth to a daughter. Rose was a beautiful baby with Katherine's dark hair and Marcus's blue-gray eyes, and she was utterly spoiled by her father and brothers. Marcus had always been a loving father, but something about having a daughter softened him even further. He was putty in Rose's tiny hands from the moment she was born. "You are going to ruin that girl," Katherine told him one evening, finding him rocking Rose to sleep long after she should have been put down in her crib. "She is too precious to put down," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off his sleeping daughter. "Besides, the boys keep me plenty tough. I can afford to be soft with this one. She is going to have you wrapped around her little finger. She already does." Marcus finally stood and carried Rose to her crib, tucking her in gently before turning back to Katherine. "Just like her mother has me wrapped around hers." Katherine smiled and stepped into his embrace. Even after years of marriage, his arms around her still felt like coming home. "Are you happy, Marcus?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He kissed the top of her head. "Remember the day I found you crying by the fence? You looked so lost and broken. Now look at you. Look at what we have built together. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe this is real." "I felt the same way. I thought my life was over that day. But you saw me, really saw me, and you offered me kindness when you had no reason to. You saved me, Marcus. We saved each other." Marcus pulled back to look at her, his weathered face full of the love that had only deepened over the years. "You gave me a reason to live again, Katherine. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just existing. Everything good in my life came from the moment I decided to ride over and see why a woman was crying by a fence. I am glad you did. I am glad for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here to you, to this life." They stood there in the quiet nursery, holding each other and listening to their children sleep. And Katherine thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How tragedy and loss could somehow transform into joy and abundance if you were willing to take a chance, to trust, to let yourself be seen. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Matthew showed an early aptitude for working with horses and animals, often accompanying his father on ranch work from the time he could sit a horse. The twins were more adventurous, always getting into trouble, exploring every corner of the property and beyond. Rose proved to be the most intelligent of the bunch, learning to read at 4 and constantly asking questions about everything she saw. When Matthew was 10, Katherine gave birth to another son, their 5th child. They named him Martin, and he came into the world with a calm temperament that was a relief after the endless energy of his older siblings. Marcus joked that Martin was the universe's way of letting them catch their breath before old age set in. The years passed in the way they do when life is full and happy, each day blending into the next in a tapestry of small moments and large memories. There were challenges, of course, droughts that tested their water resources, a bad winter that killed some cattle, a fire that destroyed one of the barns and took weeks to clean up and rebuild. The children had their share of injuries and illnesses, the normal trials of growing up on a ranch. Through it all, Katherine and Marcus stood together. Their love had evolved from the intense passion of newlyweds into something deeper and more enduring, a partnership built on trust and respect and genuine affection. They still laughed together, still made love with enthusiasm if less frequency than in their early years, still talked long into the night about their dreams and fears and plans. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Katherine back to the spot where they had first met. The fence still stood, though it had been repaired and reinforced over the years. They sat together on horseback, looking out over land that was now entirely theirs, purchased and paid for through years of hard work. "You remember what you were thinking that day?" Marcus asked, his hand reaching across to take hers. "I was thinking that my life was over, that I had nothing left to live for." Katherine squeezed his hand. "I was so wrong. My life had not ended. It was just about to begin. I almost did not stop. I saw you from the road and thought about minding my own business. But something made me turn my horse around, made me come see if you needed help. I am very glad you did not mind your own business." Marcus turned to look at her, and despite the passage of 15 years, Katherine still felt her heart skip when his blue-gray eyes met hers. "I saw you weeping near that fence, and something in my heart recognized you, like I had been waiting for you without knowing it. Does that sound foolish?" "Not at all, because I looked up and saw kindness in your weathered face, and I felt safe for the first time since my parents died. I felt seen." Katherine leaned across the space between their horses to kiss him. "You are still the best man I know, Marcus O'Brien. And I would choose you 1,000 times over in any life, in any world." "Let us ride home," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "Our children will be wondering where we went." They rode back to the ranch house together, older and wiser than the broken people who had met here 15 years earlier, but no less in love. More in love, perhaps, for having weathered life's storms together and come through stronger for it. The children were indeed waiting for them, having conspired with Mrs. Chen to prepare an anniversary celebration. The house was decorated with wildflowers, and the table was set with their best dishes. Dinner was chaotic and loud, with 5 children all trying to talk at once and show their parents the gifts they had made. Martin, now 5 years old, presented a drawing of the family stick figures holding hands in front of a house. Rose, 9 years old and already showing signs of the beauty she would become, recited a poem she had written. The twins, now 13 and full of teenage awkwardness, mumbled their congratulations while Matthew, 15 and nearly as tall as his father, made a formal speech about love and commitment that made Katherine cry. After dinner, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Marcus and Katherine sat on the porch they had sat on countless times before. The stars wheeled overhead in their familiar patterns, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack. "We did good," Marcus said quietly. "Look at what we made, Katherine. 5 healthy children, a ranch that will support generations, a love that has lasted through everything life threw at us. We did real good. We did." Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and something uniquely Marcus. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still, grandchildren to spoil, adventures to have. Whatever comes, we will face it together, always together." They sat there until the cold drove them inside, then went to bed and made love with the comfortable passion of long married couples who knew every inch of each other's bodies and hearts. Afterwards, curled together in the darkness, Katherine thought about the girl she had been, crying by a fence with no hope for the future. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this abundance of joy. But a man with kind eyes and a weathered face had seen her pain and offered help with no expectation of reward. And in doing so, he had given her everything. The years continued their steady march. Matthew married at 22, bringing home a sweet-tempered girl from town named Anna. They built a house on the far edge of the O'Brien property and started their own family, giving Marcus and Katherine their first grandchildren. The twins left to seek adventure, Michael joining the army, and Miles heading to San Francisco to try his hand at business. Rose surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school in Porterville, and dedicating herself to educating children of all backgrounds, including the Chinese workers' children that the regular school refused. Martin stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and clearly being groomed to take over the operation someday. He married a rancher's daughter from the next county, a capable woman who reminded Katherine of her younger self, strong and practical with a good head for business. As Marcus approached his 60th year, he began to slow down, though he refused to admit it. Katherine watched him with concern, seeing the stiffness in his joints on cold mornings, the way he tired more easily than before. But his eyes still lit up when he saw her, and his kiss still made her heart race even after more than 30 years of marriage. One spring evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Marcus took Katherine's hand and said, "I have been thinking about something." "That is always dangerous," she teased, but her smile was gentle. "I want to go back to San Francisco. I want to take you to the city, show you the sights, stay in a fancy hotel, eat in restaurants. We have been working this ranch for 3 decades. I think we have earned a vacation." Katherine was surprised. Marcus never wanted to leave the ranch, never showed interest in travel. "Are you feeling all right?" "I am feeling like I want to spoil my wife while I still can." He raised her hand to his lips. "We are not getting any younger, Katherine. I want to make some memories while we are still able. What do you say?" "I say yes." "When do we leave?" They spent 2 glorious weeks in San Francisco that summer, staying in a grand hotel and acting like wealthy tourists. Marcus bought Katherine beautiful dresses and took her to the theater. They ate in fine restaurants and walked through parks and took a ferry across the bay. It was magical, but what Katherine treasured most was not the luxury or the sights, but simply spending unhurried time with her husband. remembering what it was like to be just the two of them without the demands of ranch and family always pressing. On their last night before returning home, they stood on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out over the city lights. Marcus wrapped his arms around Katherine from behind, resting his chin on her head. "Thank you for saying yes to me all those years ago," he said softly. "Thank you for taking a chance on a beat-up cowboy with more hope than sense. Thank you for stopping when you saw me crying. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for every day of the last 30 years." Katherine turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Marcus O'Brien. More than I did when we married, more than I did yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." They made love that night with the slow tenderness of long practice, savoring each touch, each kiss, knowing that while they had today, tomorrow was never guaranteed. Afterwards, they fell asleep wrapped around each other, just as they had done thousands of times before. They returned to the ranch refreshed and reconnected, jumping back into the work with renewed energy. The ranch was thriving under Martin's increasingly capable management, which allowed Marcus to take more time away from the heavy labor. He spent his days doing lighter work, training horses, mentoring his son and grandsons, and always finding time to sit with Katherine on the porch in the evening. On a cool October evening, as they watched their grandchildren play in the yard, Marcus turned to Katherine with that look she had learned to recognize over the years, the one that meant he was about to say something important. "I have never told you this properly, but I need you to know. That day I saw you crying by the fence was the day my life truly began. Everything before that was just preparation. Every moment since then has been grace." He took both her hands in his. "If I died tomorrow, I would die the happiest man who ever lived, because I got to love you. I got to be loved by you. That is more than most people get in a lifetime." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Please do not talk about dying. We have years left, Marcus." "I know, but I wanted to say it anyway, just so it is said." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. "I love you, Katherine, today and always." "Today and always," she echoed. The sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the hills in shades of copper and amber. Their grandchildren's laughter rang out in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in the house, Martin and his wife were preparing dinner. The ranch stretched around them, solid and enduring, built by their hands and their love. Marcus and Katherine sat together on the porch, watching the day fade into night, their hands clasped tight. Two people who had found each other at their lowest points and built something beautiful together. Two souls who had recognized each other across the divide of grief and loneliness and reached out to create connection, family, legacy. The stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had wheeled above them for 3 decades of marriage, witnessing their love story unfold season by season, year by year. And still they sat together, Marcus and Katherine O'Brien, the cowboy and the widow, the man with kindness in his weathered face and the woman who had been weeping by a fence so long ago. Their love had started with a simple act of compassion, a stranger helping someone in need. But it had grown into something vast and enduring, a love that had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle, and emerged stronger for the trials it had faced. It was a love that had created life and purpose, that had transformed grief into joy, that had proved that sometimes the end of one road is just the beginning of another, better path. As full darkness settled over the ranch, Marcus and Katherine finally rose and walked into their home, their hands still joined, their hearts still beating in rhythm after all these years. Behind them, the fence where they first met stood silent in the moonlight, a wooden witness to where a great love story had begun, all because one man saw a woman weeping and stopped to help. And she saw kindness in his weathered face and took a chance on hope. And they lived fully and completely, surrounded by children and grandchildren, working the land they loved until age finally slowed them down. When Marcus passed peacefully in his sleep at 71, with Katherine beside him holding his hand, his last words were "Thank you for every day." Katherine grieved him deeply, but without regret, knowing that they had shared a love most people only dreamed of, that they had built something lasting and good, that their story would live on through the children and grandchildren who bore their legacy. She lived 8 more years, staying on the ranch, watching her family grow and thrive, telling stories about their grandfather to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who gathered around her. She spoke often of that first day, of weeping by a fence and looking up to see kindness in a weathered face, of the man who stopped to help and ended up giving her the world. When Katherine finally passed at 79, surrounded by 3 generations of O'Briens, her last words were, "I am coming, Marcus. Wait for me." She was buried beside him on the hill overlooking their ranch, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had watched over their love story from beginning to end. And if love could transcend death, then surely they were together again, young and whole, riding through eternal hills under endless stars, their hands joined and their hearts at peace, forever bound by the kindness and hope and deep, enduring love that had defined their extraordinary journey together.